authority like government, like last week. We're going to talk about authority as in your boss and your job. Isn't that great? Yeah, some people are excited. Here's what I know about everybody's job. Your job stinks. That's what I know about every job. Your job stinks. I know you might like your job. I know you might have fun times at your job from time to time, but there are parts of it that stink. And want to know how I know that your job stinks? Because you get a paycheck. They have to pay you to do it. You don't do it for free. Okay? Nobody goes into an office and says, hey, nice cubicle. Mind if I sit for 8 hours and file papers for you? Okay, no one does that because you have to pay someone to do it. Okay, so I know right off the get-go that your job stinks. And that's because if you work at it long enough, eventually you're going to get frustrated with one of two people. Either your boss or the customers. One or the other are going to start making your eyes twitch, and I know this. I've worked enough jobs in my time. I've been a video editor. I've worked retail. I've worked fast food. I've worked. I was a camera operator for the Whitecaps. That's the training minor league team for the Tigers. And I've worked a lot of different jobs, and all of them had great things about them. All of them had great blessings, but they all stunk because they all, at some point or another, involved people that drove me nuts and made my eyes twitch. But nothing gave me facial twitches and seizures like the bus station. Nothing did that more. I used to work at the Grand Rapids Greyhound station, and I would be involved with ticket sales and loading luggage. And the customers would make my eye really begin to, I try to hold it in because I want to be professional. And I want to be adequate, and I want to treat people with dignity and tact. Even when my customers are stupid, I want to very much treat them with respect. And they made it so hard. They really did. They really stretched me like a rubber band that was about to snap at any moment. And people would know because I would leave the front counter area back to the employee area and the break room area, and my eye would just be, have you ever had that where your eye just starts to, and it just is twitching? People are like, you doing all right? And I'm like, dumb customers. Now, I wasn't mad at my boss because my boss was my mom. And so I couldn't have a problem with her out loud. I had to keep that all really inside. But the customers were special. In fact, I even made a list. It's actually 16 pages long list that I posted online called Stories from the Bus Station. And I couldn't call it Stories from the Greyhound because it's copyrighted and trademarked and I would get sued. So I called it Stories from the Bus Station. Let me just share with you, these are not made up. These are not exaggerated. These are, while my eye was twitching, I wrote them down. Okay, so that I would get it as accurate as I possibly could. I'm not going to read all of them because I have like 160 of them, but I got a couple here just to give you a glimpse of what it was like. Like, for example, a college student came up to me and they paid with a credit card. Okay, so I swiped the card and a receipt came out. And I gave them the receipt. And the student asked me, where do I sign? And I said, right down there on the line. Then they asked me, do I sign my name? This is a college student from Michigan State University. I wanted so much to say, no, sign Barack Obama. Let's just have fun with this. You know, but I didn't. I kept it in. I kept my sarcasm in, but my eyes starting to twitch. And then another one. This was January 1st, 2016. Okay, this is very, very recent. This is just, like 10 months ago, okay? January 1st, New Year's Day. I'm in the back, I'm working, and somebody comes up to the counter and they ring the bell. Ding! So I work my way up to the front to the registers. And I go in there, hi there, how can I help you? And the guy looked at me straight in the face. I kid you not, he asked, are you guys open? And I said, yes, we're open. And then he said, I kid you not, still look at me square in the face, are you sure? And I wanted so much to say, well, if not, I made a really big mistake showing up. But I had to keep that in. Let's see here. Another fun one here was, someone called on the phone. And they said, I answered, I go, Grand Rapids Greyhound, how can I help you? And the customer's like, finally, someone, a live person to talk to. I'm so thankful. And I said, well, I'm glad you called. He goes, okay, thanks, bye. And he hung up. Kid you not. One more, just last one. This customer came in and he said, I demand a ticket for free, and it's Greyhound's fault that I missed the bus. I demand a free ticket. And I said, well, what's going on? What happened? He said, the bus left while I was in the bathroom, for crying out loud. And I said, but the bus left like over an hour ago. Why are you now coming up to me? He said, well, I just got here. I'm like, from where? He said, from home. So let me get this straight. You're telling me it's Greyhound's fault for leaving while you were at home in the bathroom. He said, yes, exactly. I want a free ticket. See, my eye begins to twitch. And it's so frustrating. But that's just it. If it were fun, they wouldn't have to pay me to do it. I'd be willing to pay to do it. Kind of like going to Disney World. People don't have to pay me to go. People don't have to pay me to go to the movie theater. I'm pretty much going to pay to go. Because I want to go because it's fun. When Rogue One comes out, tickets go on sale tonight at midnight. I'm actually going to be awake at midnight to spend money. Why? To buy a ticket. Why? So that I can go. They do not have to pay me to go there. I know it'd be great if they did, wouldn't it? But if they had to pay me, that means I'd have to write about it. That means I'd have to deal with the editors and the producers and the paper people and the bosses. Then my job would stink. And that's just kind of how that goes. So here's the thing. We're going to be dealing with bosses and the job market. And how do we respond in a godly way when our bosses, our employers are not godly people and they don't treat us in a godly way? How do we handle cruel bosses? How do we work with this? And what's the response supposed to be? And how can we rechange our perspective to make our job place more effective and impactful? So this is what Peter's going to be dealing with, because the church is in exile. The churches are dealing with ungodly bosses and ungodly jobs and an ungodly land ruled by ungodly governors and emperors. And so he's telling the church, here's how you work as a godly person. Here's how you live a godly life in such an environment. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So we're in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 18 to 25. It's the rest of chapter 2. And what we're going to start with is this interesting passage here about slaves and masters. And I'm going to have to unpack this very delicately because this brings up a lot of controversy. So let's check this out. Starting at verse 18. Household slaves, Peter is writing. Household slaves, submit with all fear to your masters, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the cruel. For it brings favor if, mindful of God's will, someone endures grief and suffering unjustly. For what credit is there if you sin and are punished and you endure it? But when you do what is good and you suffer, if you endure it, this brings favor with God. Okay, now, we're going to have to unpack this because you might immediately say, well, Pastor John, there's nothing here about bosses and employees. In fact, it says slaves and masters. And while you might feel like your job is slave labor, clearly you're not slaves there. But here's the problem. We need to get Uncle Tom's Cabin and roots out of our mind when we think of the word slavery with the Bible. We have to get Amistad out of there. Okay, slavery in the Bible does not mean the 1800s African Americans and Irish. Okay, it doesn't mean the Africans and the Irish slavery of the 1800s as an example. This slavery that is being talked about is not that type of slavery at all. In fact, most times in the Bible when slavery is mentioned has nothing to do with people being kidnapped and forced into slavery. That is not what it's talking about. In fact, we even have verses in Scripture that goes completely against that. Like, for example, Exodus 21:16 that says, kidnappers must be put to death, whether they are caught in possession of their victims or have already sold them as slaves. So there's only about 4 times where slavery, as we might think of it, is mentioned in Scripture, and all times it involves the death penalty, with the exception of the one passage in the New Testament, 1 Timothy chapter 1, verses 9 through 10, that says kidnappers will not enter the kingdom of heaven. And so it's very strict here, okay, that this is a horrible sin to kidnap someone and put them into slavery. But that is not the slavery that is being talked about on all the other verses of slaves and masters. In fact, people sometimes will even say, and you've heard the argument, well, if you're going to talk about marriage in this way and sin in that way, and if you're going to quote certain passages of the Bible, then how do you handle slaves, huh? It said slavery was okay, and it's all support of slavery. How can you handle that? Clearly, that was wrong. So clearly, if that was wrong in the Bible, then other verses can be wrong too. To which we need to stop and back up and realize that slavery in the Bible was actually a helpful thing. Slavery in the Bible was a good thing. Here's how slavery worked in the Bible. Now that your attention's like, did he just say slavery was good? I need context here because someone's going to splice this online and make me sound like a Yahoo. I'm watching you, camera operator. So here's the thing. Here's how this works. If you were an individual who were a farmer, let's say, we have a lot of farmers here, and if you were a farmer, and let's say you had a bad year. Any farmers ever had a bad year? Where your crops were not what you thought they were going to be, and you just didn't have it. Okay, you just didn't get the produce like you wanted, so your income was significantly dwindled. But your expenses always remain the same, don't they? Okay, and so when they have a really bad year and they find themselves in a financial desperate situation, there was a drought, whatever, there was a bug, pestilence, something happened, and now all the crops have died, they don't have the income. Now what are they going to do? They would do what is called slavery. And what someone would do is they would look at their income and say, my family's going to starve. I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to go to someone who is wealthy. And I'm going to ask them if they will cover the expenses of my family for so many years, and in response to that, I will be their servant. I will be their slave for so many years, and I will work for them. So what they're doing is they're saying that what slavery is saying, I have financial expenses I can't meet, so I will go to someone and work for them in exchange for money. What does that sound like? A job. Okay, that sounds like a job, which is exactly what it is. So when we see slaves and masters in the Bible, when it says slaves, be good to your masters and follow them, what it's saying is, employees, you said you would do a certain job, a certain way, for a certain type of income, be a man or woman of your word and do it. And then when it talks about masters, don't be cruel, it is saying, don't be a jerk of a boss. These people are in a desperate situation, don't take advantage of them. Treat them well. But even if they are a bad boss and they're cruel, still, you entered into agreement, do your job. Still do your job, even if your boss is absolutely cruel. So that's the situation that's happening here. So when we see slaves and masters, don't see Africans. Don't see Irish of the 1800s. Instead, see an employee going to a time clock, going cha-ching, and then going to their boss saying, what would you have me do today, sir? Okay, see that. That is what is going on. So if someone comes at you and they say, well, you believe this is a sin, well, what about slavery? You could say, what, employment's a bad thing? Because that's what that's about. Okay, it is a willful, voluntary option to go into slavery for the sake of making the family survive. Okay, that's what it is about. If someone's kidnapped, well, we got all those other verses that says, hey, those kidnappers need to be put to death. Okay, that just needs to be, that whole situation needs to be righted. And so that's the situation in Scripture there. So hopefully we can kind of have that in mind now as we go through. So here's the thing. And as you work with your boss, here's what's going to happen. If you work your job long enough, you know what's going to happen? You're going to get frustrated, likely with whom? Your boss. Eventually you'll get frustrated with your boss because, I don't know if I'm sure I'm the only one that struggled with this. That I had a boss that wanted me to do something that I had a way that was more efficient. I'm sure I'm the only one that had that issue, right? Where I'm like, hey, if we did it this way, it would get done better. And the boss goes, nope, I want you to do it this way. In fact, I want you to do this other job instead. And then they give me other jobs to do that makes my other jobs late. And then they pile on more and they get mad at me for not getting it done. Anybody been there? Okay, yeah, you've been. You just don't want to raise your hand because you're embarrassed. But yeah, you've been there where you've had that high demanding boss. You've ever had a boss have a bad idea? And you try to tell them, dude, that's a bad idea. And the boss is like, well, it's my idea and I like it and we're going to do it. And you try to tell them, hey, this is what's going to happen. If you do this, this is going to fall apart. Our customers are going to get mad. Don't do that. That's a bad idea. Anybody ever, am I seriously the only one? Okay, good. Other people are like, yeah, I had bosses have bad ideas. In fact, you know that maybe you know the boss I'm talking about. When you think of bad ideas, they pop up in your head along with the phrase, what were you thinking? Did you take a blow to the head as a child? Well, that is the worst idea. In fact, I have a little list of worst ideas that I one time wanted to tell my boss when I was at the bus station, but I don't talk about that boss because I love my mom. But they had a really, I just wanted to say, this is a bad idea. In fact, that's the worst idea. That is the worst idea since turtleneck sweaters. That's the worst idea since Twilight. That's the worst idea since reality programming. The worst idea since pet walruses, marrying Tom Cruise, and pickled flavored toothpaste. Boss, that's a bad idea. Yes, the pickled flavored toothpaste is real. But we've seen bosses, and just from all of that, there's been bad ideas. And somewhere there's a boss that came up with it. I don't know who's the person that goes, if only this tasted like pickles. I just don't know who came up with that. That's a bad idea. There's even bacon-flavored toothpaste. Now, I understand that one a little bit, but I don't want to try it because I love bacon. Oh, bacon. Love the smell of bacon. But in my mind, bacon says grease and fat, not what you brush your teeth with. But people have these ideas. Somewhere there's an employee that says, sir, that's a bad idea. There was a restaurant in the state of Washington. It was called The Outhouse. And it was a steakhouse, but they called it The Outhouse. I kid you not. And each seat was built like a commode that you would sit on to eat your food. And everything was outhouse type language. And the store closed the day after it opened because nobody showed up. And somewhere someone went up to this guy and said, dude, I think that's a bad idea. I don't think it should work. And then he tried opening up, after that one failed, he opened up a steak shop called Upchuck, where the benches were mouths and the table was vomit, okay? Anyway, that closed next day too. No one showed up. And you just know. So there are bosses that have bad ideas. That absolutely is the case. But keep in mind, if you're going to work for a boss, the goal is to make your boss money. That's really the goal. The goal is to get paid so that you can deal with your expenses, but you have an additional goal of making your boss money. Because your boss is starting a company for what reason? Just to give you a job? No, they didn't have you in mind when they started the job, not usually, unless you are related to the boss. Okay? They usually want to start a company. Why do people want to start companies? So that they can make money. Okay, then they hire employees to do what? Make money. That's what bosses are about. So if you're going to work for a boss, you have to help them make money, which means play by their rules because it's their sandbox. Okay, it's their sandbox. If you want to play in their sandbox, then you have to do it their way. And that's how it works. Are you always going to be pleased with your boss? No. But that doesn't mean you treat your boss like a jerk. It doesn't mean that you argue and fight with your boss. Offer ideas, offer suggestions, and when they say no, move on. Okay, it's kind of like, employment has a similar relationship with a spouse. Are you always happy with your spouse? No, you're not always happy with your spouse. Okay, anybody who thinks that they're always happy with their spouse, one of two things have happened. Either they just got married, or one of them has problems, they just don't know it yet, but they're probably doing this on a rubber wall, a padded wall with a little jacket. Okay, they got problems, they just don't know it. And so you're going to have times where you're not happy with your spouse. Does that mean you can cheat on your spouse and treat them like a jerk? No, you deal with it in a dignified, respectful manner. Okay, so it's the similar type of situation. And Jesus understands this. It's good to know that Jesus understands this. Because even he made a statement. In Matthew 23, verses 1 through 3, he said this. Then Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples. The scribes and the Pharisees are seated in the chair of Moses. Therefore, which means they're in a position of authority. Okay, so he said the scribes and the Pharisees, they're authoritative. They have a position of authority. Okay, respect them because of their job. It's kind of like the President of the United States. You might not like the person, but you respect them and you talk well of them because of their position. Okay, so this is the situation here. The scribes, they sit in the chair of Moses. They have authority. Therefore, do whatever they tell you and observe it, but don't do what they do because they don't practice what they teach. In other words, listen to your boss even when they're idiots. Okay, that's a paraphrase of that for you. Jesus didn't use the word idiot, but that's kind of what he's referring to, okay, hypocrites. And so you might have, I'm sure you've had bosses that have asked you to do a job they would never touch with the 10-foot pole. Okay, and so that's the situation. Do the job anyway. You do what they say as long as it's not sin is the other added thing we would put on with that. But you do the job even if you think they are absolutely moronic about it. And so he continues on. And Peter says, first off, slaves and masters, slaves, do the job. Do the job. Whether your boss is nice, whether your boss is cruel, do the job. And if you do the job, even with the cruel boss, you will be extra blessed by God because it is a great favor from him. He really appreciates it if you suffer unjustly and you do it with dignity and tact. Okay, if you can do that, you will get favor with God. He will bless, because it's great to know that God's the ultimate judge, that nothing escapes his notice. It's good to know that. Very good to know that. But Peter continues, and he says, in case you think obeying a cruel judge or a cruel boss is rough, and you think having unjust suffering is unfair, he goes on to explain, well, you serve a God who does exactly that. He suffered unjustly under cruel authority of the leadership of the land. And he goes on about how Jesus did this as an example. Check this out. He continues on. For you were called to this. Isn't that good to know? He says, hey, if you have a cruel boss, deal with it because you were called to have a cruel boss at that moment. Yes, you can quit your job and find a different job because it's different now. You don't enter into a 7-year contract. Wouldn't that really stink? Okay, but you don't enter into that long of a contract. But if you have a cruel boss, maybe look for another job. But in the meantime, you do the job. And you do it well. And he says, for you were called to this because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an what? Example. This is important because it's real easy to say, well, you're saying we need to suffer like Jesus suffered. Well, Jesus was God and he suffered for the sins of the world on the cross. That's a different scenario. That doesn't apply to me. Jesus suffered as one person's brave enough to say it, example. Jesus suffered as an example so that you should follow. Means suffer. Okay, that you should follow in his steps. He did not commit sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. In other words, when he was unjustly being treated, when he was suffering for something he didn't even do. Anybody ever get in trouble with the boss for something that was not your fault? Okay, Jesus, that's kind of the situation he was in a more extreme way. And while he was being charged for something not his fault, something he was innocent about, during that suffering, he did not commit sin. He did not verbally lash out. He did not insult. He did not fight or raise up a hand. He did not scream and shout. He did not even lie to try to get out of the situation. No deceit was found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. Always drives me nuts when someone says, hey, Billy, did you hit Tommy? Yeah, but he hit me first. I don't care now. It doesn't matter who did it first. The point is you responded in a sinful way. Okay, so he did not revile in return. When he was suffering, he did not threaten. You think Jesus had the right to threaten? I mean, he's God. Isn't God a holy God? Isn't God a type of God who have smited people for doing things irreverently? Isn't he a God of justice and punishment? And yes, he is. And yet Jesus, as our example, did not do that. When he was suffering, he did not threaten, but instead he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. Jesus knew that God was better at vengeance, that the Father is better at vengeance than what we could ever be. And he wanted to be that example. He himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, so that having died to sins, we might live for righteousness. You have been healed by his wounds, for you were like sheep going astray, but you have now returned to the shepherd and guardian of your souls. So Peter gets a good chance to be able to throw in the gospel there just for a moment. and to say that, did you know that when you suffer unjustly, that you are representing a glimpse of the gospel? Isn't that interesting? When your boss lays into you something unfairly and you endure it and you respond with love, dignity, and tact, you are giving a glimpse of the gospel. So that anyone that might come up to you and say, why did you just do that? And just say, you know, of all the ways he has criticized me, even though they were untrue, I do have sin in my life that is worth criticizing. And it just reminds me of that. And so, you know, I'm going to just take it. It's not worth fighting. I want to treat him with dignity and respect. He's the boss. And in so doing, I'm following in the way that my Jesus has exemplified for me when he took everything I did wrong to the cross, unfairly, unjustly. See, now isn't that a great response to a fellow coworker? But if you fight and yell and call your boss's name, sure, you get a Hollywood hero moment like Catwoman, but Catwoman was a horrible movie, so why follow that as an example when you can follow Jesus, okay? Just the thing. We need to follow Jesus. Because remember verse 17 from last week? Show proper respect to whom? Everyone. Love the family of believers, fear God, honor the emperor. Okay, that was one of our verses from last week. You just respond in that way. But what I want us to do as we try to figure out, how do we do this? How do we actually do this? How do we be that type of an employee? How do we handle all of the emotions that are inside? What can we do about this? Maybe you might even be thinking, Pastor John, could you just make this extremely, intensely practical? Could you take it a step further? To which I would say, I would love to. Thank you for asking. As if we haven't already, but let's go ahead and give a couple of examples. Practical example number one, I'd like to call it the test. The test. Here's a test you can give your boss. Are you ready? And no, it's not an IQ test because he would probably fail. Or maybe not. If you had that type of boss, they do exist. I'm sorry. Sometimes people are promoted because no one has the guts to fire them, and they're getting into a position where they do the least amount of damage, and that ends up impacting other people. And that happens sometimes. And if that's yours, I'm sorry. Just do your best to deal with it. But here's the test to give to your boss. You ready for this? Go up to your boss and ask your boss to rate you on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 meaning that they got your pink slip ready to be handed to you and you're about to be fired because you're a terrible employee. 10 meaning that they would love to offer you the keys of the company because you're like the best employee and they want you to be president and CEO. Okay, so when you get a number less than 10, because you're not the perfect employee, okay, so when you ask, give me a scale of 1 to 10. 1 meaning we're just terrible employee, you want to fire me. 10 meaning I'm the best employee in the world. They're going to make a movie about me. Okay, what number would you rank me at? And then when they give you that number less than 10, don't defend yourself. Don't feel angry about it. Even if they give you a 4, don't go, oh my word, my boss hates me. The next question would then be, okay, with that number, what could I do to make that number higher? And then listen to them. Listen to them. And whatever response they give, take it to heart and see if there's something you can do. Because the goal is to be the best employee possible, and the goal is to make your boss money. Oh, by the way, that test works great on marriages. You ought to try that sometime. Go up to your spouse and say, how would you rate me, honey, on a scale of 1 to 10? How happy are you in our marriage right now? 1 meaning that you know we're basically fist fighting each other, and 10 meaning that Jesus is going to take lessons from us. Okay, we've got the best marriage in the world. And so where would you rate your satisfaction on this marriage? And when they give a number less than 10, and they will, then ask, what could I do to make that number a higher number for you? And then listen, don't defend. If they say, well, if you did this, this, and that, don't say, well, I do that this day, and this day, and this day, and I do that because this day, or don't defend. Don't say a word, guys. Don't cry, women. Listen to it. And then take it. And then see if there's something you can do. Because isn't the goal a happy home? If you love your spouse, don't you want it to be a happy marriage? Okay, so do the test. Doesn't that sound fun? It sounds scary. What was I thinking? Let's go to the next one. Seriously, do the test. It is a great test. What can I do to make the number higher? And then a second one and final one, and we'll be done because this one's going to take a little bit longer. It is called the reputation test. Do you make those who are in authority over you look good? Do you make them look good? In other words, when you're in the break room and you're talking with employees, is the boss's reputation better because of your conversation when they're not around? How well do you talk about your boss when they're not around? How well do you talk about their ideas even if you disagree? Do you protect their ideas? Do you promote their reputation? Do you make it better? Do you polish it? Or do you make it worse? Do you insult them? Do you belittle them? Do you say, I have no idea what they were thinking, they're so stupid, and you're wrecking their reputation? How are you making your boss look good? There was a joke that goes around pastors sometimes when they go to new churches, and they'll say, hi, my name is so-and-so, and here's my wife, she makes me look good. And everybody gets a good chuckle about it. But in a sense, isn't that a beautiful picture? Children, how do you handle those in authority over you, like your parents, when your parents aren't around, and you're talking with your friends? Do you make your parents look good? Or do you wreck their reputation by saying, my old man doesn't even get it? He is so strict, so stupid, he has his head so far, he has curvature of his spine that he bends back and his head goes right up his rear. That's how my old man is. Is that how you talk about him? Or do you try to defend the reputation? Do you try to talk well of them in their absence? See, that's a good test for number 2. Good application for number 2. Make them look good. Because here's the thing. You might think, well, what difference does it make? They'll never know. It's not like my dad has a bug underneath, like an NCIS, a bug under my collar. It's not like that he's hearing me from my cell phone. It's not like hang on, let me turn my phone off before I talk about my dad. It's not like he can hear me, or anything like that. So what difference could it possibly make? Let me just tell you something very interesting. This is a big theological concept for you. Your individual sin actually has a ripple effect that decreases the spiritual activity of the entire group. That happens throughout the Bible from Genesis all the way through, where one person's sin impacts the success of the group. For example, if you were to turn to the book of Joshua chapter 7 and you find out that they're trying to take the city because God said, go into the land. I have given it to you, Israel. Go into the land. And if there's someone there that won't give it to you, that's your land, your promised land, then go to war, fight them and remove them. In fact, there are some nations that are so wicked, I have cast my judgment upon them. And Israel, you will be my instrument of judgment. I will judge them with you and your sword. So when I tell you to kill everybody, it might sound cruel, but really it's the act of judgment. It's like people dying without Jesus. There's judgment that's there. And so Israel, you're my judgment. Go in and defeat the nations and be my hand of justice. And then when Israel goes in, and they would win and win and win, and then suddenly they get to a battle and they lose. And they don't know how they lost, and they're confused. And we get to know because of Joshua chapter 7, verses 1 through 12, that tells us what happened and how Israel lost a random battle. Because the battle before, there was a guy named Achan, and Achan saw the spoils of war, and the goal that God had said to do was to burn everything. Don't keep any of the livestock, don't keep any of the money, get rid of it all. And then Achan saw it and went, wow, they got the money here. It's like going into someone's office and finding a safe with $1 million in it. And you're like, nobody knew this was here. Why set fire to it when I could put it in my pockets? How many people would be tempted to do that? Okay, and so this is what Achan did. Achan took the bacon, and then the nation was Achan. Because what happened was after Achan took the money and did not obey the command of God, God pulled his hand of influence off of the nation of people because of one person. Because of one person. He took his hand off of them. So when they went into war again, they lost. And they lost. And once they found out what Achan had done and they corrected the situation, they went back into battle and won. And they kept winning and kept winning. That is what happened. Even in the New Testament, we have people at the beginning of the church in the book of Acts who had kept money. They said, I'm going to pledge to the church $5,000. And then they sell their refrigerator or their piece of land, and they actually got like $8,000. And they said, I told the church 5. I told them I'd sell the land and give them the money. It'd be about 5,000. I got 8. They don't have to know. I'll give them the 5. I want to keep the 3 to myself. And then the Spirit said, hey, something's wrong here. And they stopped all services and all influence was gone. And they had to figure out what was going on until they dealt with it. Okay, so this is Ananias and Sapphira. And so this is what happens, is that your sin impacts the effectiveness of the whole. Isn't that interesting? That's what happens. So don't think that you're talking bad about your dad is just your private sin, your issue that has no impact on your family, no impact on your friends, no impact on your church. It has impact on all of it. Not only in the spiritual sense, but also in your personal attitude toward your parent when you're actually communicating how much you despise your parent and how that changes your interaction with them. Not only does that also influence your friends and how they start thinking about your parent and their own parent. And then you come to church and expect God to be honored and glorified by your hypocrisy. You got another thing coming. Your sin impacts all of it. How we treat those in authority is of grave importance. It will impact the success even of this church. It will impact the success of our witness. It will impact the success of your job. It impacts the success of everything. We must treat people with dignity and respect. The whole thing centers down to one simple question. How devoted to God are you going to be? Are you so devoted to God? Have you surrendered everything about you to God so greatly, so intently, that you are willing to suffer unjustly with respect and dignity under a cruel boss? Under times of conflict in your home, under times of conflict in the church, under times of conflict with coworkers or whatever the case may be, with the government, with laws, whatever, are you willing to try to work with the system to the best of your ability, but in the end, not sinning because you've been unjustly treated? Are you that devoted to God that you're able to say, you know what, I'm just going to do my best to change what I can, but ultimately, may my life point people to Jesus? How sold out to God are you? Are you willing to treat your boss better? Your spouse better? Because that all is from that. It's all from that devotion to Christ. I mean, if you're devoted to yourself, you're devoted to your kingdom, making your kingdom great, then yeah, you're going to get mad at everybody because they're wrecking your kingdom. But we're not supposed to be about our kingdom. We're supposed to be about His kingdom. And in His kingdom, your responses matter. Let's have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, Lord, it is so easy for us to want to fight fire with fire. Lord, that when we're wronged, we want to wrong back. When we're insulted, we want to insult back. In fact, Lord, many times our minds get filled with so many quick responses. And Lord, I ask that we might have the strength, have the devotion to stay our tongue, that we might respond as Jesus responded. That when He was being beaten, He said, Father, forgive them. That when He was being tortured, He still died on the cross. Lord, may we have such an attitude. May we have such humility. And ultimately, Lord, may our actions lead people to You. That they might find forgiveness in Your Son who died on the cross and rose again. That they might find the answer for all the sin and the struggle that they're dealing with. Let's pray in Your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen.